I will do my graphic novels, and then I'll follow that up by illustrating someone else's book. And I also still do picture books and chapter books, and the graphic novels of my own. There hasn't been anything where I prefer one or the other. I mean, there's something fascinating about illustrating someone else's story, because there are stories that you never would have thought about, and it gives you a chance to collaborate, which is really interesting. And then, of course, writing your own and drawing your own story, you're in charge of all of it, so that's fascinating too. But I love them both, and I'm going to continue doing both. I always did like history, though, so it was sort of, I was interested in different times, and that sort of just came out. They were the stories I wanted to tell. So it was never really a definite, I'm going to write historical fiction. It's just sort of worked out that way. So yes, but mostly history, I think. I read fantasy, I read Lloyd Alexander when I was a kid, and Encyclopedia Brown, things like that. So Buster Keaton I've been a fan of Buster Keaton since I was a kid. When I was like 5 or 6, my dad would take out a Super 8 projector, and my brother and I would watch Buster Keaton and Chaplin and Laurel and Hardy. And I just thought they were just movies. I didn't think of like, oh, it's a silent movie. They were just really funny. And as I got older, I became more interested in him as a filmmaker. When I was in college, I went to film school, and I just became obsessed with him a little bit. And his filmmaking, there was a documentary called A Hard Act to Follow, which came out, which was just brilliant. It showed how brilliant he was as a filmmaker. And that's when I really became obsessed with him. At that point, too, his films were hard to get. They weren't on DVD yet. That happened in the mid-90s. So I would go into libraries and old bookstores and try to find old copies of his movies that I'd never seen before. So I was always tracking him down. For BLUFFTON, it came from reading, 20 years ago I was reading his autobiography, which is called My Wonderful World of Slapstick. And in it, he talks about his early years in vaudeville, but also these vacations that his family would take in the summer in Muskegon, Michigan, where for 3 months out of the year, he could just be a regular kid. Because all the other times he was a professional performer. And he would just play baseball and fish and do these elaborate pranks. And he said later in his life that no matter everything he did in his life, the happiest days of his life were his summers in BLUFFTON. And I always thought, wow, that's an interesting story. If I want to do something at Buster Keaton, instead of doing his filmmaking, I'm going to zero in on this happiest moment of his life, these summers. And that's where the book came from. I had my library in my neighborhood I could go to, which I would just love, and I was just always there in the children's section. And my school library too. I was such a reader that my 3rd grade teacher during the reading section would let me just go down to the library, because I would just bring a stack of books and she knew I was going to read them. So I had like a special library privilege. Yeah, it's very important. Well, I've talked to librarians about it. I mean, the kids gravitate to the graphic novels and they're going through them and stuff like that. The only thing I've heard, and this is not really my idea, just heard from librarians, that they were thinking of sub-categorizing maybe, because there'd be some kids who maybe like historical fiction, but they don't know about graphic novels, but if they knew that this was a graphic novel about the Dust Bowl, they might be interested in Storm in the Barn or something like that. So, but that's very tricky. I mean, I understand it's very complicated about the coding and all that sort of things, but in a perfect world, you'd have a couple copies, and Storm in the Barn could be in the fiction section as well as the graphic novel section and that sort of thing. But that's perfect world. I mean, the most you can do is just let the kids see them, which is already happening in libraries. Phased out books, and my library where I live in the Haverford Township Library in Pennsylvania, their graphic novels section. Huh?
You want to do a shout out to them?
Yeah, shout out to Haverford Township Library. The graphic novel section, both in children's and the adults, is amazing, and the circulation is crazy, and they just do a great job of phasing things out and showing the kids what's new and all kinds of stuff like that. Putting them out there is really the best thing they can do, because kids will find them.